The first punch came before the bell, before the bow, before anyone said begin. The big man crossed the room in 3 steps and swung for Bruce Lee's head with everything he had. A right hand thrown to end a life, not win a fight. No warning. No respect. Just a fist the size of a brick coming down out of nowhere at a man half his weight. And Bruce wasn't there. That's the thing the old man could never forget. 50 years later his hands still moved when he told it. Bruce wasn't where the punch went. The big man's fist tore through empty air with such force it spun him a quarter turn, and before his feet could fix it, before his brain could even register that he'd missed, something hit him under the ribs so fast and so hard that the sound of it, the old man swears to this, the sound of it stopped every conversation in the room. The giant folded. 260 pounds of him dropped to one knee on the floorboards, gasping like a man pulled out of deep water. And it had been, what, 2 seconds? Maybe 3? That's the fight everyone told me never happened. I want you to hold that image. The big man on his knee. Bruce already stepped back, hands low, not even breathing hard. Because for 3 years, every single person who should have known told me that moment was a lie. A story. Smoke somebody blew one night to make the past sound bigger than it was. And I believed them. For a long time, I believed them. Until an old man pulled open a drawer that had been shut for 50 years, and the smell of old film came up out of the dark like a breath the room had been holding since before I was born. Sharp. Sour. A little like vinegar, a little like dust, a little like time itself gone slightly off. He reached past the yellowed envelopes and the brittle contact sheets, past all of it, with a hand that wasn't quite steady, like he knew exactly where the thing lived in the dark and had known for 50 years, and just never let himself touch it. A single strip of film. He held it up to the lamp. And he said, quiet, almost to himself, I never showed this to anybody. Not my wife. Not the men who came asking. Nobody. On that strip was the proof. The fight everyone swore was a ghost. The punch that missed. The giant on his knee. All of it. Frozen in silver on a piece of film an old man had hidden in a drawer for half a century. But here's what stopped my heart in that little room. It wasn't that the photograph proved the legend true. It was that the photograph proved the legend wrong. Because what was actually on that film, the thing the old man had been too afraid, or too loyal, or too haunted to show another living soul, was stranger than any story anyone had ever told me. And once I saw it, I understood why he'd kept it buried. I understood everything. So before I show you what was on that strip, and I'm going to, all of it, I won't dangle it and run, I have to take you back. Back through 3 years of dead ends and dead men and witnesses who couldn't agree on the color of a wall. Because the truth I found in that room didn't just confirm the fight on the harbor, or the champion with the stopwatch. It cracked both of them wide open. Sit with me on this one. Pour something if you got it. This isn't a fight story. I've told you fight stories, and I'll tell you more of them. This is the story of how I went looking for whether any of it was even real, and what I found in a drawer that stuck. Let me take you back 3 years. To a phone call I almost didn't make. 3 years ago, I was a man who told stories for a living and had started to hate the sound of his own voice. Not the voice itself, the doubt under it. I'd been telling these tales the old way, the harbor, the stopwatch, the closed rooms, telling them the way they were handed to me, coach to coach, gym light to gym light. And somewhere along the line a quiet question started gnawing at me. The worst question a man who loves something can ask. What if none of it is true? What if the giant on the fishing dock never existed? What if the champion with the brass stopwatch and the $2,000 was just a character somebody invented to dress up a lesson so it'd stick? I'd been passing these down like gospel, and one morning I woke up cold with a feeling that I might be passing down smoke. That somewhere a real young man had done real, hard, ordinary work, and we'd buried him under tails so shiny nobody could see the actual person anymore. That's a sickness for a man who tells stories. Once you doubt the thing you built your voice on, you can't tell it the same. A flatness creeps in. The listener can't name it, but he feels it. I'd get to the good part, and a little voice would say, "You don't actually know this happened," and the words would come out a half step cooler than they should. So I made a decision. I was going to find out. Find the bones under these stories, or find out there were no bones, and either way stop lying to myself, and to you. I figured a few months. It took 3 years. And the first thing I learned was that digging up the truth about a quiet man's fights from 50 years back is the hardest thing in the world, because the men who know are dying. One a month, it felt like. Every name somebody gave me came with the same sentence attached. "Oh, you'd want old so-and-so for that. Shame! He passed last spring." I was racing a clock I couldn't see. Same as the men in the stories, when you think about it. Always a clock. Let me tell you about the first door I knocked on. There was a man. I'll call him the gatekeeper, because that's what he was to that world. Trained in those closed rooms in the 60s. Last of a particular line. Everyone said if anybody could tell me whether the stopwatch fight was real, it was him. Took me 4 months to get him to answer a letter. 2 more to get him to sit with me. And when I finally drove out, old man, sharp eyes, hands like roots, I asked him straight, "Did it happen? The champion, the watch, the money on the table, the 19 seconds?" He looked at me a long time, and he said, "Which version did you hear?" Which version? That was the first crack in the floor, because it turned out there wasn't one story. There were a dozen. And every man who claimed to have been in that room remembered a different fight. Let me lay the contradictions out for you, because they nearly broke me, and because they taught me something about truth I didn't know going in. The gatekeeper told me the champion went down in 19 seconds. Clean. Stopwatch and all. The second man I found, fighter himself, trained in the same city, swore on his mother he was there, told me 30 seconds and no stopwatch at all. Said the stopwatch was nonsense. Said somebody added the watch later because it made a better story. Bruce didn't need a clock, he told me. The fight needed one, so people put one in. The third man told me the champion never went down at all. Said it was a draw. Said both men walked out on their feet and shook hands, and that the whole he dropped him cold ending was a thing the gym kids cooked up over the years. And a fourth man, and this is the one that put me on the floor, a fourth man looked me dead in the eye and said the champion fight never happened. That there was no champion. That somebody confused it with a sparring session that got out of hand, and 50 years of retelling turned a hard afternoon into a duel for $2,000. 4 men. 4 fights. One of them may be real. I drove home that night, and I'll be honest with you, I almost quit. I sat in the driveway with the engine off for the better part of an hour, and I thought, there's no truth here to find. There's just smoke and old men, and the smoke gets thicker every year somebody dies. I'd given a year to it by then, and it felt like I'd gone backward. Started with one story I half believed and ended with four I couldn't believe at all. That's the lowest I got. I want you to know that, because anybody who tells you a search like this is a straight line is selling you something. It's not a line. It's a man sitting in a dark driveway wondering if he wasted a year chasing a ghost. But here's what I figured out in that driveway, and it's the thing that saved the whole search, so let me give it to you straight. I'd been asking the wrong question. I'd been asking, did it happen exactly the way I tell it? And the answer to that is always no. Always. No story that gets passed mouth to mouth for 50 years survives unchanged. The stopwatch grows. The seconds shrink. The money on the table goes up with every man who tells it. That's not lying. That's what memory does. That's what we do. We polish the stones we love until they shine. And the shine isn't the lie. The shine is the love. The right question wasn't, did it happen exactly this way? The right question was, is there a man underneath all four of these stories? A real afternoon. A real fight that four old men, 50 years and 100 retellings later, each remembered through their own crack in the wall. And the moment I asked it that way, the moment I stopped hunting for one perfect true version and started hunting for the thing all four versions were circling, the whole search turned over. Like a key finding the one position it was cut for. Because all four men, for all they disagreed, agreed on three things. There was a big man. There was a fast man. And the fast man won. Strip away the stopwatch, the money, the seconds, the handshake, strip all of it, and underneath, every single one of them put Bruce Lee in a room with someone bigger, and every single one of them, even the doubter, even the man who called it a sparring session, put Bruce on top at the end. 4 cracks in the wall, but behind the wall, the same room. That's when I knew there was something real to find. Not the story. The thing under the story. And that's when I started asking everyone the same new question. Not, what happened? But, was anyone there with a camera? For a year, the answer was always the same. No. No cameras in those rooms. That was the whole point of those rooms. No cameras, no press, no record. That's why the fights live in smoke. Nobody was supposed to write any of it down. And then one afternoon, an old woman, widow of one of the men who'd already passed, said something offhand while she was making me tea I didn't ask for. She said her late husband used to complain about a kid who was always around back then. A nuisance, he called him, always underfoot at the gyms, and the docks with that camera around his neck. What camera? I said. Careful. Like you'd speak to a bird you didn't want to startle. Oh, he took pictures of everything, she said. Drove the fighters crazy. Nobody wanted their picture taken in those days. She set the tea down. Don't know whatever happened to all those photographs. He'd have had thousands. A kid, with a camera, at the gyms and the docks, in those years. I put the tea down without drinking it, because the docks, the harbor, that was the other story. The giant on the fishing dock. And the gyms, that was the stopwatch. The same kid, maybe at both. It took me 8 more months to find out his name. 8 months to find a name. I'll spare you most of it, but not all, because the way I found him matters to what he showed me. I started with the widow's word, a kid, a camera, the gyms, the docks, and I worked it like a thread you're afraid to pull too hard for fear it snaps. Old club rosters. Names in the margins of training logs. A few photographs that had survived in private hands, and on the back of two of them, in faded pencil, the same set of initials. Not a signature. Just initials, the way a shy kid marks his work when he doesn't yet believe it's worth a name. Those initials turned up in 3 different cities over a span of 10 years. Same hand. Same careful little pencil mark. And every place those initials showed up, a story showed up with them. The kid who was always there. The kid nobody paid attention to because a quiet boy with a camera is the easiest thing in the world to forget. And that's the thing about him, the thing I came to understand. He was invisible. Not by accident, by nature. He was the kind of person a room forgets is in it. Which is exactly the kind of person who sees everything. I want you to sit with that for a second. Because everybody I talked to for 2 years was a fighter, or a fighter's friend, or a fighter's widow, men and women who were in the fight of the fight, too close to it to see it straight. They remembered the way a man in a fight remembers, in heat, in pieces, in pride. That's why they all remembered different fights. But the kid wasn't in it. The kid was behind the camera, off to the side, watching the whole room while everyone else watched the 2 men in the middle. If anybody had seen it true, seen it cold, seen it whole, it was the one person nobody ever thought to ask. I found his name on the back of a photograph of a fishing boat. Just the boat, no people. Same pencil initials. And underneath, in the same hand, a single word in a year. The name of the harbor. The harbor from the first story. He'd been there. On the docks. The day of the giant. I had a name by then, but a name 50 years old is almost nothing. Half the trail said he'd died. One man told me, flat out, "Oh, he's been gone 20 years. Another said no, he'd moved north, gone quiet, stopped taking pictures altogether sometime in the 70s. Just stopped, like a man who'd seen something through that lens he didn't want to see any more of. That detail snagged on me. A man who took pictures of everything, for years, all over, and then one day simply quit. Put the camera down and never picked it up again. People don't quit the thing they love for no reason. It took me the better part of those 8 months and more dead ends than I can count, but I found him. Alive. Old, older than anybody guessed, in a small town a long way from any of it. And here's a thing I learned that I'll carry the rest of my life. The people who were closest to the legend are the ones who run the farthest from it. He'd spent 50 years making himself hard to find. And I'd spent 3 years getting good at finding men who didn't want finding. We were always going to end up in the same room. The first time I called, he hung up on me. The second time, he let me get one sentence out, and the sentence was, "I think you took a photograph on a fishing dock 50 years ago." And there was a silence on that line so long I thought the call had dropped. And then, very quietly, an old man's voice said, "Who told you about the dock?" Not a question. A door, opening a crack. It took 3 more phone calls, and a drive I won't forget to get him to let me through his front door. And when he finally did, when I was finally standing in the room I'd spent 3 years walking toward, the first thing I noticed wasn't him. It was the walls. Bare. A man who'd taken thousands of photographs, and not one of them hanging anywhere. A photographer's house with no photographs on the walls. I've thought about that 100 times since. A man surrounded by his own silence. He made me sit. He looked at me for a long while with eyes that had gone pale at the edges the way old eyes do, and he said, "You've been busy." He knew. Word travels, even 50 years down. He knew somebody had been out there for 3 years pulling on the thread, and some part of him, I think, had been waiting. The way you wait for a thing you dread and want in equal measure. I asked him about the harbor. Carefully. The giant on the dock. The young man who fought him. And the old photographer said, "Everybody asks about the dock." A pause. "Nobody ever asks the right thing." I said, and I meant it. "Then tell me the right thing." He stood up. Slow, the way a man stands when his body's been arguing with him for years. And he crossed the room to an old wooden dresser in the corner. And he put his hand on the bottom drawer. And he stopped. He stood there with his hand on that drawer for a long time. Long enough that I didn't dare breathe. And he said, not to me, almost to himself, "I told myself I'd never open this for anybody." I didn't say anything. 3 years had taught me that much. When a man stands at the edge of 50 years of silence, you do not push him. You wait. You let the silence do the work the silence has been waiting to do. And then he pulled. The drawer stuck, swollen with half a century of damp. He worked it side to side, and it gave all at once, and slid open, and the smell came up out of the dark. Old film. Sharp and sour, a little like vinegar, a little like dust, a little like time itself gone slightly off. The smell of a thing decaying so slowly you could measure it in decades, rising up like a breath the room had been holding since before I was born. Inside, strips of negatives. Yellowed envelopes. Contact sheets gone brittle at the corners. 50 years of one man's silence, all in one drawer. And his hand went past all of it, straight to the back, to one strip of film he didn't have to search for, because he'd known exactly where it lived in the dark for 50 years, and had just never let himself touch it. He lifted it out. He held it up to the lamp. And he said, quiet, almost to himself, "I never showed this to anybody. Not my wife. Not the men who came asking. Nobody." Then he turned, and he held it out to me. And he said, "Look, and then tell me if you still want to tell these stories." I took it from his hand, and I held it up to the lamp the way he had. Now, you have to understand what I expected. 3 years of stories had built a picture in my head, and the picture was the one I gave you at the start. The giant swinging before the bell. Bruce not there. The fist tearing through empty air. The big man folding to one knee. That's the legend. That's the fight everyone said never happened, the one I'd come to prove was real. And the strip in my hand was that fight. Frame after frame of it. The big man enormous mid-lunge. Bruce, small against him, already moving. The blur of a body that's faster than the shutter. It was real. After 3 years, there it was in silver, exactly as the stories said. The harbor. The giant. The young man who beat him. I felt the thing you feel when a thing you fought for finally lands. Relief so big it's almost grief. And then I got to the last frame. The last frame on the strip was not the giant on his knee. The last frame was after. After the fight was over. after the big man had gone down and the thing was decided. And in that frame, the big man is on the ground, and Bruce is not standing over him in triumph. Bruce is kneeling, down beside the man who just tried to take his head off, one hand on the giant's shoulder, helping him up. That's it. That's the photograph an old man hid in a drawer for 50 years. Not the knockout. The knockout anybody would have shown. The knockout makes Bruce a legend, and a legend is an easy thing to carry. No, what he hid, what he couldn't show his own wife, what he was too haunted to let out of that drawer for half a century, was the moment after the violence. The hand on the shoulder. The winner kneeling down in the dirt to lift up the man he'd just beaten. And I looked up at him, and I didn't understand yet, and I said, "Why? Why would you hide this? This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Why keep this in the dark for 50 years? And the old photographer looked at me with those pale eyes, and he said the thing I'd driven 3 years to hear, though I didn't know it was the thing until he said it. He said, "Because nobody wanted it." He said the men came, over the years, asking, same as me, and every one of them wanted the fight. Wanted the punch, the speed, the giant going down. He said he showed a few of them, early on, the whole strip, including the last frame, and he watched their faces, and on the last frame their faces did nothing. Went flat. One of them, he said, asked if he could have a print of the good one, the knockout, and left the last frame on the table. They wanted a weapon, the old man said. I had a man, and nobody ever came for the man. So he stopped showing it. Then he stopped showing any of it. Then one day he put the camera down for good, because he'd spent his whole young life standing off to the side of rooms, seeing the thing under the thing, seeing the man inside the fighter, and he'd learned that nobody wanted what he saw. They wanted the shine. They never wanted what the shine was made of. And that's when it hit me, sitting in that bare-walled house, that strip of film shaking just slightly in my hand. That's when I understood what I'd actually found in 3 years of looking. I didn't find out the legend was true. I found out the legend was small. Everything they argued about, the stopwatch, the 19 seconds, the $2,000, the giant on the dock, all of it true enough, all of it real enough, and all of it beside the point. For old men remembered 4 different fights, and they were fighting over the shine while the actual man, the whole man, sat in the dark of a drawer in a town none of them could find. The fastest hands of his generation. And the thing he did that nobody kept, nobody framed, nobody passed down, was kneel in the dirt and lift up the man he beat. We remember the punch. He'd have wanted us to remember the hand. So let me answer the question I started this whole thing with. 3 years ago I asked, is any of it true? And I was so afraid the answer was no. I was afraid I'd been passing down smoke. Here's the answer. It's truer than I knew, but not in the place I was looking. The truth was never in whether the giant went down in 2 seconds or 3. The truth was in the frame after, the frame everybody left on the table. And the reason I can tell these stories again, the reason the flatness has gone out of my voice, is that I finally know what I'm actually telling. I'm not telling you about a weapon. There are 1,000 men out there who'll sell you the weapon, the speed, the knockout, the man as a highlight reel. Let them. I'm telling you about a man who could end anyone in the room and chose, in the half second after, to reach down and help. That's the story under all the stories. That's the bone under the smoke. The old photographer let me have one thing before I left. Not the film. The film stays with him, and it should. He let me look at that last frame as long as I wanted. And when I finally set it down, careful, back in his hand, he said one more thing. He said, "You're the first one who asked the right thing." I said I didn't think I had. I thought I'd asked about the dock same as everybody. And he said, "No, you asked why I hid it. Nobody ever asked why." I think about that on the drive home every time. Everybody asks what happened. Almost nobody asks why a man would bury the most beautiful moment of his life in a drawer for 50 years. The answer is because we taught him to. Because we kept coming for the punch and leaving the hand on the table. 50 years of us choosing the shine over the man. I don't want to be one more of those faces that goes flat at the last frame. So that's where I'll leave you tonight. Not with a knockout. With the hand on the shoulder. The winner in the dirt, lifting up the man he beat. Pour the last of whatever you poured. Sit with it a minute. And before you go, there's one more thing in that drawer I haven't told you about. Because when the old man reached past all those negatives, his hand brushed one more envelope, older than the rest. A name on it I recognized, a name from a fight I've never told you, in a city I've never named, against a man history says Bruce Lee never even met. But that's a drawer for another night. Thank you for sitting with me, brother. I'll see you next time.